A small limestone cavern in lonely moorland north of Tredegar has become known as the Chartists Cave, but no evidence exists for how it came by this name, or indeed what might have gone on there. Accessible only by way of rough tracks, the cave is difficult to find. This can be hazardous country in mist or bad weather.
Well, those Chartists must have been fit. Quite a long way to come and store weapons, if that's true.
Well, I've never believed those claims, Jane, because what an unlikely place to bring materials to make weapons up here, and indeed to store them. It was so far away from everywhere. Well, when you think it would have been a long walk for people carrying materials to make pikes, so I've never believed those claims on there. Were pikes ever made in this cave? Were they ever stored in this cave? I think that's highly unlikely. Something else went on here which gave the cave its name.
So they're called the Chartists Caves. Why would that be then?
Well, we don't know. This is one of the great mysteries of the area, in fact. One of the very mysterious places. I mean, weapons were being stored under Zephaniah Williams's pub in Nantiglow, that is known. Pikes were being made in blacksmith shops around the Usk Valley area. So it's a mystery, one of the most mysterious places in the area. But something was discovered here back in 1970 that puts a light upon Chartism which may or may not be correct.
So what's the mystery? What happened in there?
Well, it is a mystery because in 1970 a group of cavers from Bristol came here and they dug out that passageway, because this cave has never been linked up with the big series that runs under this hillside. And they dug the clay in the back and they found the remains of leg bones, actually human leg bones. And they thought, of course, they discovered cave dwellers. But they went to the police pathologist in Cardiff and he said no, he dated them approximately to the Chartist period, around about 1839-ish, that general period. And all those bones had been severed with a hand axe or a butcher's cleaver. In one case, the whole end of the bone had been cut away. So you're left with this strange mystery. Why are there bones in this cave? So I often wonder about this because it seems to me there are three reasons. One is they are of murder victims, which nothing at all to do with Chartism, nothing whatsoever, completely unrelated. Or the second one is, faintly possible, during the attack on Newport, people were mortally wounded, possibly. They died when they came back to their homes, and to stop recriminations against the families, their bodies were dismembered for easier carriage and brought up here and buried in this general area. The third one is that they could well be the bones of informers. It's known there were government informers operating in the area undercover, and they might have been discovered. They might have been brought here, they might have been executed here, and by some stretch of the imagination, possibly chopped up for burial, scattered over the area. It's an unpleasant thought. If that's the case, if it is true, then it puts a different perspective upon certain aspects of Chartism.
I suppose to understand what happened and what is in that cave or was in that cave, we need to understand more about the area at the time.
Yeah, indeed, how right you are, because this was then a wild and a violent and a rough area. It really was. And the possibility of people being murdered is quite likely.
I heard that lights were seen coming across the mountains during the time of the Chartists, called the Chartist Lights.
That's perfectly true.
At this sort of place.
It's amazing. They were heading in this direction, so something went on here during the Chartist period. Could it have been secret meetings? Might they have been holding kangaroo courts here? Was this a place of execution? A bit far-fetched, possibly, but nevertheless. And were they dismembering bodies to hide them here? But if there were secret meetings here, they were very secret to be held in such a remote and difficult of access place. If they were holding meetings here, one person who would have been here was Zephaniah Williams, the local leader. He certainly spoke at meetings held at Starfield, Tredegar. What is now the Railway Tavern in Sir Howie, Ralph, was once Sahawi House in which Daniel Gooch lived.
So I understand, and what an eminent man he was to
An
come from such a
incredible
place.
character.
Absolutely. He started off here at 15 years of age, and very soon afterwards became, I understand, an eminent engineer. He became chairman of the Great Western Railway. He took over chairmanship and the running. He was, in fact, the latter day Richard Branson.
Yeah, yes.
He was an entrepreneur.
But doesn't his life here, his experiences here, tell something about the violence that was endemic in this area?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, iron towns were notoriously sort of violent and lawless places at this period, and never more so, Peter, when on monthly paydays the men seemed to crowd into taverns and very often stayed there until the money ran out. And of course that criminals came here to seek refuge.
Is that because there was no law here?
It was a lawless society, essentially lawless. And but in 1831, you know, Daniel Gooch, later to become a very eminent and respected businessman and entrepreneur, he was seized upon by a group of men from Ebervale and Nantiglow,
Yes.
and forced with his friends to march with them to join up with the Merthyr rioters.
Right, from this actual place?
From this place, from this area here.
Yes.
And I understand that he tracked down the road,
Well,
goaded along with sticks, with iron spikes.
The spikes on the end.
Yeah, yeah. But later on, not too soon afterwards, with the rioters dispersed and defeated, they came tracking back up Sahawi Hill, and Gooch and his friends had a revenge.
How did they do that?
Well, from this, so it's said, from this hill here, they pelted them with stones.
So they really were. What this does show, although it's not connected with Chartism as such, it does paint a picture of a violent area, a rough and a wild and almost a lawless area.
It was, and for that reason it became known as the land where the bad people lived.
Oh. And this stone, the famous Sahawi stone, has always intrigued me, Jeff. Is there some sort of history behind this?
Yes, it's one of the two marker stones for Sahawi that was put up in 1818.
Right.
And people like Daniel Gooch, the engineer, would have known of it because he lived nearby.
Yes,
But
of
actually, the stone marks the acquisition by the Harvard Ebervale Company of the Sky Ironworks.
Right.
And this inevitably led to a lot of bitter divisions between the people of Sahawi and Tredegar. And Harvard himself had put the stone up to say it was Sahawi, but the people of Tredegar thought it meant success. So inevitably, the communities of Sahawi and Scova were divided from the people of Tredegar.
Oh, of course, of course.
And this led to a certain amount of hostility, because later on, at the time of the Chartists protests in 1839, the people of Sahawi moved from here over to Zephaniah Williams in Nantiglow, which is two valleys to the east, rather than join their friends in Tredegar. So at the time of the protest in November 1839, the people marching to Newport would have passed this stone on the way down to Newport.
So actually that stone could tell some stories.
Oh, yes,
if only
yes.
we could tap into it. So this is Starfield, I believe. So a very important place in Chartism, I believe.
Yes, here once stood the Star Inn, a very important Chartist lodge, and in whose field alongside quite a few important Chartist meetings were held. In August 1839, a large crowd gathered here to support the Sahawi Declaration, presented by John Frost and others as a last attempt for peace, but was in actual fact an attempt to really discredit the moral force argument. The Sir Howie Declaration was actually petitioning the Queen to, and I quote, dismiss her ministry and replace them with wiser and cleverer men, and dismiss Parliament. Even in today's world, that would be a ridiculous thing to ask. Now, Frost was instructed to deliver this declaration to Home Secretary Russell in London, who he naturally refused to meet him, which was probably the intention. Because now they could argue that the moral argument wasn't going to work, and only physically violent action would bring about results. So here in Starfields, a British Revolution was more or less inevitable.
So it's from here, Ivian, that the Sir Howie Chartists marched to Nantiglow to join Zephaniah Williams. Sir Howie was a very important Chartist area, of course, and Sir Howie Ironworks, where we are now, played a big part in the movement. What can you tell us about this place, Frank?
Well, they start building it in 1778, and it goes into blast in 1779.
Right.
And it's the first coke-fired blast furnace in the old Monmouthshire. So it's a very important place. Until 1818, it was run jointly with the Tredegar Works, and then the Ebbw Works take it over, which leads to a century of rivalry between the two places. The most important connection in Chartist terms is Zephaniah Williams, who worked for the Sir Howie Ironworks as the mineral agent, which was a very well-paid and important job in those days. It's the equivalent of a geologist really now. And of course, just before the Chartist uprising, he moves from here to Nantiglow to become the landlord of the Royal Oak. And some people think that it was at the meetings at the Royal Oak, because the Royal Oak became the most important Chartist lodge in the area, that Dr. William Price, the Druid and cremationist, decided that there had to be a parting of the ways, because of course Zephaniah Williams was on the physical force wing of Chartism, and William Price was against physical force, and he said famously, "I'll not have a sword put in my hand and a noose around my neck at the same time."
Wise man. So why are the arches behind us so high, Frank?
Well, they built the blast furnaces against the bank so that they could load or charge the furnaces from the top. So all the raw materials were up there on the top, and then they barrowed the raw materials into the furnace, so that they built against the bank. That's why they're there, really.
Okay.
And of course, charging the furnace is a very dangerous job.
I should imagine.
There's lots of fumes and gases coming out, and people were sometimes overcome by the fumes and the gases and fell in to the blast furnace, which would have been a terrible, terrible way to die.
Yes.
But it happens. Of course, nasty accidents are part of everyday life here during the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. So in that case, that makes, if you're a Chartist, you wanted to get rid of some informer, that might well have been a very good way to get rid of the bodies, wouldn't it?
It's certainly what I would have done.
Yeah.
I think throwing somebody into a blast furnace is a sure way of getting rid of all the evidence that they ever existed.
That's right.
And it's a better option probably than dragging bodies across Treville Moor to the cave.
Right.
But of course the stories of the bodies in the cave are long-lived and they stick about, don't they?
They do stick about. Oh, thank you very much, Frank.
You're very welcome.
Sunday, November the 3rd dawned a driving rain and high winds, and although the Tredegar Chartists were going to march from the Red Lion public house down in the town, others waited here at the Crown Inn, looking for the Merthyr contingent. Now, I'm with Kevin Phillips, heritage filmmaker. So, can you take the story on from that, Kev?
Well, as far as we know, Pete, the actual riders come here around this area asking people to bear arms for the Chartist uprising. The Crown would have been a good convenient point for them to stop, and like you said, the weather was really bad, so it would been a good place to take shelter.
So, Kev, did all the men they expected turn up?
Many men didn't, Pete, many men. Houses were searched for these men.
Yes.
They were searching for weapons. They was actually forcing a lot of people who was not committed to the Chartist cause into the actual march from here that was on the way down to the Red Lion. What we've got to remember is that this was treason, and treason was a death penalty.
Yes, of course it was, of course. So, how long were they waiting? They waited, I assume, throughout the day. When did they actually leave this place, these local Chartists?
It must have been round about nightfall, Pete. And at nightfall, you can imagine, just behind us here where the crowning is, a large group of men would have started from here and made their way down to Charles Street.
And of course, onto the Red Line to meet the others who were then going to march on Newport.
Onto the Red Lion.
That's right. And of course, no Sahawi or Scurva men would have come here, would they? Because they would have gone over to Nantiglow with Zephaniah Williams.
That's right, that's right.
So, which way were these disappointed Chartists, disappointed when the Merthyr contingent didn't turn up, which way would they have gone?
Well, they would have come down the road, yes, here, Pete, in front of the Crown, down to Charles Street, with the weapons that were distributed from places, perhaps like the Chartist Cave, or other locations where they was dished out in secret.
And so they went down the Dram Road, did they not?
They went down the Dram Road towards the Red Lion.
And of course, then ended up at Newport.
Exactly, with John Frost.
The Chartists actually started their march from Tredegar at the Crown, which is just behind us. So we're coming down Charles Street, Trevor. What actually happened here in this spot?
Well, they sort of all congregated here. It's sort of a catchment area. And they started searching then for people who hadn't turned up. So indiscriminately, they went in the houses with pikes, ripping off the curtains to look for anybody. But then they didn't find anybody because they'd all scarpered over the mountains along Gunnedah.
So what sort of weapons were they carrying, Trevor?
Well, mainly pikes that they acquired from farms or somewhere. But pikes are a real active weapon because you could stab horses with them, you could stab people with them, you could poke into haylofts to see if anybody hiding in there, you could poke into beds to see if anybody hiding under the blankets. And the pike was a very useful thing. They had sash windows at the time, and most of them were open, so you could poke the pike in and grab hold of the curtains. And one family actually kept the curtains as a souvenir.
Well. So where were they going from here, Trevor?
Well, they had arranged to meet a contingent at Blackwood, so they went down through the town of Tredegar towards Blackwood.
Is it true they were still hunting for men on their march down the valley?
Oh, yes, whenever the opportunity arose, they all went to look for men, and they knew some would promise to turn up and hadn't. And a matter of fact, at Kevin Forest near Blackwood, 2 men who resisted them were apparently stopped to death.
So from here, Trevor, the Chartists actually marched from this spot down the tram road on our right-hand side, down into the town of Tredegar. Now, I've just walked down Carmel Lane past Carmel Chapel to this spot, which is closely associated with the story of Sahawi and Scurva Chartists. And with me is Philip Rosso, who's going to tell us something about this. What actually happened at this place, Philip?
Well, the Sahawi and Scurva men, at the beginning of their march from the start in, to meet Zephaniah Williams at Nantiglow, they proceeded down past Carmel Chapel. And at the time, the vicar of Carmel Chapel, he was against the Chartist movement at the time.
Yes.
As he was in the chapel at the time, he heard the marchers coming towards him, and he ups and runs down the lane in fear of his life.
Yes.
He comes down to the Scurva Canal, dives into the canal, and just lay there with his head just above the water as the marchers went past. And it seemed that the marchers perhaps had gone into the chapel at the time looking for recruits for the Chartist movement. But people feared for their lives then. If they weren't connected with the Chartists, they feared for their lives. And that's why the vicar at the time, he jumped into the pool.
So it might be said, Philip, that it was from this very spot, really, that the Chartists began their march to Nantiglow to meet Zephaniah Williams.
Yeah, this was it. After they passed the Reverend in the pool, he just lay there, and they carried on towards Nantiglow.
Chartists were certainly feared. Tredegar men who had mustered at the town's Red Lion Inn would be witnessed by 9-year-old Henry Hughes returning home from chapel with his father. In later life, he would recall seeing troop after troop of marchers with rifles and pikes on their shoulders. My heart was melting with fear they would force my father to go with them. My father did not go to sleep that night, expecting they might come to our home. He recalled also how, the following day, there was not a young man or old man to be seen in the place, only women and girls, and they were in great fear and tears. So, John, we are following the march of the Tredegar Chartists. They've come down through Castle Street, they've come through the Circle, and they've come down now to Morgan Street. So, what is there special about this?
Right, well, as I said, the Tredegar Chartists came down Morgan Street and past the Central Chambers, which at the time was the newly opened bank for Tredegar.
Right, yeah.
Now, down at Newport, they had no idea what was happening up here in the valleys and what was going to take place. But the manager here was well aware exactly what was going to happen. Down in Abergavenny, people were fully aware. It was reported in the Hereford Times at the time that people were arriving continuously from Tredegar, Ebervale, Sarawi, Beaufort and Nantiglow, seeking refuge in the town. There was a great fear, a mounting, almost a panic. What increased the alarm to a great extent was the arrival at the Monmouthshire and Glamorgan Bank, the Tredegar branch manager, who arrived with a carriage with all the cash, valuables and securities from the town of Tredegar, which he now deemed as not being safe. And what they were worried about, or he was worried about, that if there would be a robbery here in Tredegar, a bank robbery, well, what else would the Chartists be capable of?
Yes. Ironmaster Sam Humphrey remained with his family in their Bedwellty house home, a clear indication he felt little threatened. Held in high respect as master and JP, he was cheered, it is claimed, by Chartists marching by. Yet Humphrey would have known the country's future then lay in the balance. For Chartism, the die was cast, and even though the assault on Newport would fail bloodily, it would concentrate government minds and hasten much-needed political reforms.
So what links this place to the Chartist rising?
Well, the honest answer is, Jane, we don't know. There's no connection whatsoever. This may have nothing whatsoever to do with the Chartist uprising of 1839. It may be all a bit of local mythology. When you think about the uprising itself, on Monday, November the 4th, 1839, the Chartists reached Newport and began attacking the West Gate, which was defended by 28 soldiers. 9 Chartists were either mortally wounded or died there and then. The rest fled. And so we have no idea whether they fled here to take refuge. What happened after that? What was the Chartist connection? You know, using imagination here, you think Pinkerton, who founded the world-famous Pinkerton Detective Agency in the United States, claimed to have marched with the Sahawi Valley Chartists. Now, supposing he had been an undercover agent, which is likely, and supposing he had been uncovered and then killed, and then his bones buried in this cave, we'd never have those wonderful stories of Pinkerton detectives chasing after Jesse James or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or the Younger Gang, or all those outlaws they chased and tried to bring to justice. We'd have lost a lot if Pinkerton had ended up in this place.
So are we any closer to solving the mystery?
Well, Jane, perhaps it will never be known why the Chartist cave got its name. But as far as I'm concerned, I hope it long continues to stimulate the imagination.
Oh.